History remembers Captain Kidd as a pirate of the worst kind. A buccaneer who pillaged ships on the high seas. More treacherous than Blackbeard and Captain Morgan. Captured and sentenced to hang for piracy, up until the end, Kidd proclaims his innocence. His body was left hanging to show what can happen to the worst of humanity. But 300 years after his death, new evidence raises the question, was he really innocent? If so, Captain Kidd is one story that history got wrong. In 1699, Captain William Kidd, pirate, is wanted around the globe. He leaves a trail of terror. Pillaging merchant ships and upsetting the balance of power among the world's richest nations. What's strange about this is that William Kidd seems so off course from the one he charted as a young man. In 1690, New York City was the favorite pirate port of call along the eastern seaboard. Only 5,000 residents lived in the little colony, and Mr. Kidd was among the wealthiest and most social. He had married a rich widow. They owned property on Wall Street and a tanning mill in what would today be the Upper East Side. They lived in a 3-story mansion on Pearl Street with the best furnishings available from the East Indies. Mr. Kidd had nothing to worry about for the rest of his life, if only he could have been happy with that.
He became a merchant captain for about 4 years, and he ran from the Caribbean up to New York and Boston and back, and clearly that life did not suit William Kidd. He did not want to be just this merchant captain, and he had desire to be a Royal Navy captain or to be a privateer aboard a really strong ship. So he left New York to go to London to seek that life.
As often happens to men of talent, someone came to him with a business scheme.
There's a big problem with piracy, and the government can't do a heck of a lot about it because they're engaged in this war with France. They're building naval vessels as fast as they can, but they can't spare them to go off and do anything.
In other words, all available men are enlisted into the Royal Navy to fight the war with France. And there's no one left to fight the pirates plundering the merchant ships. As one solution, the government invites civilians to become privateers, a kind of private security force to hunt the pirates. A privateer was issued a license, or what is called a letter of marque.
Under a normal letter of marque, it's a license, just like any hunting license, which is very specific in what you can do, where you can go, and what kinds of ships you're supposed to take. And nominally, they're the ships, theoretically, they're the ships that are owned by the nation you happen to be at war with. Or since all nations were at war with pirates, that made them legitimate prey.
The incentive is that the privateer gets to keep some of the spoils taken off the pirate ships. Since Mr. Kidd was a merchant marine captain, 2 businessmen approach him. Robert Livingston, a New York merchant, and the future governor of New York and Boston, Lord Bellamont.
And the idea is, between the 3 of them, let's have a special ship that will go off and capture the pirates that are causing the trouble, and at the same time, if we do it right, we could all make a little bit of money on this. And so Bellamont, in turn, then takes this to the people who are then the dominant voice in Parliament and says to them, look, we've got an opportunity here of doing good for the kingdom, capturing these pirates, and perhaps enriching ourselves.
4 of London's most powerful lords put up the money for the plan as silent partners. Their names will never appear on Kidd's privateer commission, but they will get 75% of the booty. But there is one person who does sign the letter of marque, authorizing the plan, the King of England. It seems perfect, except for one little catch. There is a clause in the contract that prohibits Captain Kidd from offending or molesting the ships of any friends or allies of England.
So they then have a great prize. They've got the backing of the government, and right from the top they get all the right licenses, papers, and instructions, and a ship, and a good fighting ship, and they're to go off and grab the pirates.
With the king as partner and a contract from Parliament, Kidd is running with the wind. His ship is the Adventure Galley, a 290-ton fighting ship outfitted with 34 guns. It's the business deal of a lifetime. William Kidd will soon be back on the sea lanes, this time as Captain Kidd, privateer. He leaves London, which seemed like the center of the world with its 300,000 inhabitants. She's the mother country of the American colonies, with no revolution in sight. But New York City is where Captain Kidd has to go to get his privateer crew. If he's to track pirates around the world, then beat them at their own game, he'll need an experienced crew. And in 1690, the most experienced sailors are the pirates in New York. The merchants of this raw little colony are happy to turn a good profit with the booty coming off these skilled sailors' ships.
There was very important trade that went up to Mecca, and you had these pilgrim ships going up to Mecca with lots of pilgrims, and so there were a number of pirates who got the hang of this, and they would hover around the entrance to the Red Sea.
It's the spring of 1696 when Captain Kidd docks at the island of Manhattan.
Now, if you go to New York and you start prowling the waterfront, asking for men to go off with you to Madagascar, first of all, you want people who know something about it, and chances are they're pirates. And after all, what better way to go after a pirate than to go after him with a bunch of pirates?
The bigger question is, how do you control a crew of pirates? A re-examination of the facts surrounding the trial of Captain William Kidd, the infamous buccaneer, has called into question his guilt. Is it possible he was not a pirate at all? That's a tricky question, which we're answering by following him on his new mission as a privateer. A civilian loyal to England, commissioned by the king to prey on pirates. The challenge for Captain Kidd will be to sail with a pirate crew and remain the law-abiding privateer. If ever there was a bargain with the devil.
Captain Kidd's mission is to go chase pirates, men who would rather die than surrender. He is to travel in a lone ship manned with a desperate crew, some of whom are former pirates.
They've set sail for the Indian Ocean, a business venture with the greatest risk imaginable.
On the immense Indian Ocean of 28 million square miles, he must find some of the 5 currently active European pirate ships, many of them carrying relatives and friends of his crew. And he has a 1-year time limit, and some of the most powerful men in the world waiting for him to return. It would be a fool's errand, except for the treasure.
It was good to be back at sea, on the adventure of a lifetime. He'd been there before, 20 years earlier in 1689. Kidd had been a crewman on a French privateer ship with another young man named Robert Culliford.
The French and English are at war again, and Kidd and Culliford are on a French privateer ship, you know, just living the basic sort of rogue's life. I mean, not a pirate's life, but they're on a French privateer ship. And the war breaks out, and so the French privateers are hired to fight the English. Well, the 10 English crewmen don't want to fight against England. Well, what they do is they double-cross the French, and Kidd and Culliford steal a French privateer ship and take it over to the English and volunteer to the governor to serve the crown.
Young William Kidd, Culliford, and the crew receive royal praise. Kidd for the first time is Captain Kidd, which gives him license to command his friend Culliford, and he shows no special favor. It would come back to haunt him.
They go and fight against the French, and after a couple months, Culliford realizes I don't want to be a privateer. I don't want to get in line of battle and be target practice for some French naval bombardment. I want the pirate life. So Culliford steals Captain Kidd's ship.
So much for privateering. Culliford decides to turn pirate.
There's a difference between privateering and pirating. It's a fine line, but there is an absolute difference, and it's a legal difference. If you do have a legal document in your hands from a duly elected, duly appointed representative, then you're a privateer. Then it's at least quasi-legal. There's a difference between being an out-and-out pirate, just taking ships of all nations.
Zax finds further proof when he discovers the diary of Captain Willock, a prisoner who was held for 11 months aboard the pirate ship of Captain Robert Culliford. For Zax, it defined exactly what a pirate really was and what Kidd was not.
That was the most amazing moment. I mean, it is just a down-to-earth portrayal of life aboard a pirate ship by this Captain Willocks, and it made pirate life come alive.
He found that Kidd did not engage in the behavior of pirates. He was a privateer at heart, in contrast to Culliford as described in the diary.
In Captain Kidd's day, pirates flew a blood-red flag, which basically meant, give up now, or else we will kill everybody on board. It meant we will give no quarter. And it was a terrifying thing to see that flag. Pirates were basically sailors who threw off the yoke of a miserable life in the Royal Navy or the Merchant Service and stole a ship and went out. They called it, a roguing. They went out to capture what they could.
That was Culliford, Zax believed, not Captain Kidd. But in war, things can get complicated. Both pirates and privateers would often present false flags.
It may not have been clear when someone drifted from being a privateer into a pirate. I mean, it would seem to us pretty obvious, but in fact it was common for ships in those days to fly flags of any nation they thought would serve their purpose, regardless of where they were actually from or registered. Ships carried multiple papers issued from different governments, some of them fraudulent.
Flying false colors was a way to lure the unsuspecting ship into range. And then they would use the ploy of intimidation.
They would also use terror. What they used to do was to fire a shot across the bows of their victim and then come up alongside and make a tremendous noise and racket, and all the pirates would appear on deck, shout at the top of their voices, throw hand grenades, and generally terrorize the victim into surrender, because what you wanted was to capture your victim, preferably without a fight.
If this fails, all that is left is to prepare the cannons and attack. During Kidd's famous voyage to the Indian Ocean, he will use similar methods. If someone looks like a pirate, fights like a pirate, and takes booty like a pirate, it may be hard to convince your enemies and competitors you're just a law-abiding privateer. Such is the delicacy of Captain Kidd's mission, which immediately begins to sail into troubled waters. By the time he reaches the Indian Ocean, Kidd is branded a pirate and blamed for every attack in the region.
It was founded on the rumors of these captures. All the piracies of the East Indies were lumped onto his head, onto Captain Kidd. There's just no instances of him being this brutal pirate and attacking other ships and killing the other crew, and he did a privateer's job on 2 ships.
But Robert Ritchie begs to differ. First, there's the Articles of Agreement. The sailors call it a no-pray, no-pay contract. Kidd breaks this standard contract for the crew's division of spoils. He grants a pirate's share to the crew.
This was quite a wild move. I mean, he was unable to get a crew, given the agreement that he had been given in London, where they would only give the crew 25% of the take. And so he switched it, he flipped it. He agreed to give the crew 75% of the take, and he would only reserve 25% for these incredibly powerful men. Now that was, you could call it shady, risky, whatever it was. He felt he had to make that decision in order to go out, in order to get the mission started.
Back in London, shady is exactly what partner Robert Livingston thinks. If the crew gets 75%, the partners get less. Not exactly what they agreed to.
Livingston instantly sent a letter off to the lords back in London saying, when Kidd returns to the colonies, we should capture him immediately because the word is that he's changed this agreement. So Robert Livingston had already double-crossed Kidd. You know, at this point, you could say Kidd had changed the rules, you know, and it was already getting very sticky.
His only concern now is his commission, his ship, and managing his crew.
The captain ruled supreme, and you did not disobey the orders of the captain. The problem with Captain Kidd was that he wasn't a natural leader. He tended to lead by bullying.
That, along with the cramped living quarters, created a constant state of unrest aboard the adventure galley. These are dangerous voyages. The mood of any crew can change as quickly as the tide.
These are long, arduous voyages. Things can go badly wrong. And that's when you really got to be a pretty strong individual and a pretty good captain to say, okay, let's have enough of this. Let's get on with the job here. It's not an easy thing. It's a mixture of violence and cajolery.
And sometimes mutiny. Captain William Kidd, guilty or innocent of being a pirate? Did he have evidence to prove his innocence? The answers lie in the vast hunting grounds of 18th century pirates. In the summer of 1696, Captain Kidd mans a ship mostly crewed by pirates. His mission as privateer, hunt pirates and enemy ships of the British Empire within 1 year's time, while 4 lords of England await Kidd's profitable return. Kidd has trouble finding pirate ships to plunder. Rumors spread that Kidd has turned pirate. The crew turns restless as time drifts away.
A mutiny on a ship could be caused by all sorts of things. It was usually caused by a bad captain and by bad officers, by which I mean they bullied, they were sarcastic.
That was Captain Kidd. Still, he managed to make headway, although sudden changes were in the wind.
When he's in the South Atlantic, Kidd has the great misfortune of falling in with an English squadron that's on its way south also. And suddenly, here they are, a group of naval vessels, and there he is. He's got a very large crew. Naval vessels never have enough people.
The English squadron is commanded by Commodore Warren, and they're hunting enemy ships, French ships, and their allies. Kidd fears Warren will take his men.
And they row away in the night so that by morning they're out of sight, because he was pretty sure that they were going to take a lot of men off the ship.
Kidd has now added a second piece of damaging evidence for use against him. The first are the Articles of Agreement. The second, his evasion of Commodore Warren.
Well, Warren then assumes Kidd must be a pirate, and he starts spreading these rumors. And the rumors reach the East India Company very quickly, captain to captain in the ports. The rumors spread. So before Kidd's even arrived, he is being treated by the most powerful British company there as a pirate.
This reputation follows him as he heads toward the East Indies. 1697, a year into his commission and nothing to show for it. Kidd heads to Madagascar, a refuge for pirates hoping to score. There, he receives word that he has been accused of piracy. Is Kidd really the pirate hunter who turned pirate? With no spoils to return with, Kidd misses his deadline. Now time is of the essence. The crew is restless and hungry to find treasure. In early May, Kidd sets his course towards the Red Sea.
Well, where are you going to find pirates? You're going to find them where they attack ships. I mean, to me, it's an absolute no-brainer that Kidd would go to the Red Sea, which is where the pirates attack the ships. This is where you'd find a pirate. You wait for him to capture a Muslim ship and to go off 10, 20, 30 miles away from everyone else, and then you attack him. And you fulfilled your commission perfectly.
But looking at it another way, Robert Ritchie says this is Kidd's third act of piracy. First, breaking the Articles of Agreement. Second, Kidd's suspicious actions after meeting Commodore Warren. And third, he sails to the mouth of the Red Sea, where many of the ships are friendly to England. Word of his piracy has spread. No ports of call send Captain Kidd a welcome. Kidd and the crew are stuck at sea.
By this time, his men are really getting antsy. They've spent months and months and months at sea. They've got nothing to show for it. And remember, if they don't have things that they have acquired, either through privateering or piracy, they get nothing. Finally, there's a confrontation between him and Gunner Moore.
They're sitting on the deck, he's sharpening a chisel, and he's muttering. And Captain Kidd basically confronts him about the muttering, and Moore says that you have ruined us all. And Kidd calls him a lousy dog. And then Kidd takes a bucket and swings it, and it catches Moore right in the temple and cracks Moore's skull, and Moore dies the next day. Did Kidd intend to kill Moore with a bucket? I think he might have chosen another weapon. I'm not sure. That's not the weapon of choice. But yes, Kidd snapped, lost his temper, swung the bucket. Moore died.
Not only rumored a pirate, but now a murderer. Months after missing his deadline, Kidd lies in wait along the main travel lanes for the East India Company. When he and his crew spot the outline of a ship on the horizon, Kidd orders the French flag hoisted.
They fly a French flag. He flies a French flag. They speak French across the water. They board the ship. And then, of course, well, you're not French at all. Well, of course you're not French at all. Well, that's okay. We're going to seize you now. Or we are going to seize you because you have pretended that you're French because we pretended we were French.
Kidd's ruse produces a capture.
They did present the French letter, and that letter, that document exists to this day. And by the rules of that age, this was a legitimate capture.
Anybody who is playing a cat and mouse game and trying to be a privateer, you are always trying to get the other guy to admit that he is of the nation that you need to capture, namely French. And a couple of the ships that Kidd does capture do have French papers. Not all of them do. And that's not excusable as privateering. It's piracy.
2 months later, the adventure galley spots another sail. But Kidd's luck is about to turn disastrous.
Kidd encounters this big merchant ship called the Quedar Merchant in the Indian Ocean and decides to attack it, and he captures it. Well, the fortunate thing is that it had a huge amount of rich, wealthy cargo, silks and all that sort of stuff on it. So he thinks he's got a treasure ship, and of course the crew are thrilled because at last they can see some money at the end of the voyage.
And that ship again presented a French pass and was a legitimate capture.
It's an enormous prize, the second in just a few months. The capture seems legitimate until Kidd learns damaging information.
The problem is that the Quedar Merchant had an English captain. It was owned by a consortium of Armenian merchants or businessmen, and even more fatally for Kidd, a large proportion of the cargo was owned by a senior official in the court of the Grand Mogul of India, so that by capturing this particular ship, Kidd had managed to upset a lot of interests in the Indian Ocean.
Kidd has stumbled into a political quagmire. The right thing to do is return the ship. Instead, Kidd keeps her and stores the 2 French passes, his alibis, in the lining of his waistcoat. Pirate or privateer, it's a matter of perspective. Robert Ritchie feels Kidd's actions are clear evidence he's become a pirate. But Richard Zacks tries to understand Kidd's motives and dilemma.
He was not willing to give this up. This was going to fulfill his mission. I'm sure he would have preferred to have captured a pirate ship, but he didn't have that option. He captured a ship, French pass was presented, he guarded that pass with his life, kept that pass, and brought it all the way home to the Caribbean, later to Boston, on to London. That pass was his get-out-of-jail card.
Whatever one might say about Kidd as a privateer, when he shows up at the mouth of the Red Sea and begins to attack the pilgrim fleet that's coming, these are pilgrims who have been to Mecca and they're on their way back to India. This is a famous fleet that pirates love to get because it is loaded with gold, trade goods, a lot of exotic materials, a lot of luxury goods, a lot of spices. By attacking the fleet, he's committing piracy. So along in the voyage at this point, he's not a privateer, he's really a pirate.
He would need the French passes to prove his innocence if he was caught and tried for piracy. The evidence against Kidd, however, is mounting. The Articles of Agreement, the encounter with Commodore Warren, and commandeering a Muslim ship on the Red Sea.
He has no license to do what he's doing. He has no license to attack the Muslim fleet. And it might have been that he would say, well, gee, I went looking to see if there was a pirate attacking the Pilgrim fleet. But there wasn't. He was the pirate attacking the Pilgrim fleet.
Kidd is now the #1 enemy of the East India Company, which is British-owned and partners with members of the Muslim fleet. This violates his mark.
The real problem for Kidd, having captured the Quedar Merchant, is that he becomes one in a line of English pirates or Western pirates that have attacked in the Indian Ocean. And the Mogul of India and the other India merchants feel that the British are attacking their ships.
Until the smoke clears, Kidd set sail with his 2 captured ships to the Isle of St. Maurice in Madagascar. There he is reunited with Captain Robert Culliford, the pirate who stole his ship 20 years earlier. If Kidd is hunting pirates, shouldn't he arrest Culliford and his men? History has 2 different points of view about their encounter.
Kidd gets to Madagascar, gets to the island of St. Maurice, and there are a lot of pirates there, and he could have arrested all of them. He would have been a great man in England. Everybody would have been happy. He would have followed his instructions that he had also done these other little things along the way. Might have been overlooked, but he doesn't. And of course, since he's been in the piracy business for a while, he's meeting old friends. He should have arrested them, but he didn't.
Instead of which, he goes on board and has a drink with Robert Culliford, and therefore sort of fatally compromises himself, really, because at that point it confirms the worst fears of the East India Company and all the legitimate British ships in the area, that Captain Kidd is no more than a pirate.
He clearly wanted to capture. It was a pirate ship. He could capture it. More glory for Kidd. Kidd wants to, make money, join the establishment, and he orders his men to attack, and Kidd's men refuse to attack. They mutiny over to Robert Culliford, and he loses 95 of his crew of 110 or so.
After 3 years, Kidd discards the rotting and beached Adventure Galley and heads home to New York City on one of his captured ships, the Quedar Merchant. Kidd's new mission is to prove his innocence. He is now the hunted pirate. His only proof of insurance are the 2 French passes stored in his waistcoat. After 3 years at sea, Captain William Kidd, the pirate hunter, is now the hunted. Aboard the captured Quedar Merchant, Kidd is en route back to New York City with his 2 French identity passes, proof that he captured an enemy ship, not one friendly to England. But proving his innocence will be hard to do in a stolen merchant ship. Every colonial governor has orders to seize and arrest him. On the lagoon of Santa Catalina, Kidd abandons the Quedar Merchant and buys a new ship, the San Antonio.
He decides that it's too risky, since their word is clearly out that he's a pirate. he might not make it up there if he sails on the Quito Merchant. Plus, he has almost no crew anyhow. So he wants to sail aboard an anonymous ship, basically. So he buys a ship called the San Antonio, and he sails north to New York and Boston.
As Kidd approaches New York, he receives word from Bellamont that he's in Boston.
So Kidd now has even more decisions. Do I go to Boston? Do I go to New York? Do I just disappear? Am I in trouble here?
Now governor of New York and Boston, Bellamont has a greeting for his old partner, just enough to lure Kidd to meet him.
And the governor is all smiles and thrilled to have Kidd back, and basically says, if your story is as you say, that your crew mutinied on you, there should be no problem, and please come into the harbor.
Before Kidd meets with Bellamont, he stops at Gardiner's Island to leave himself a security deposit.
He goes to Gardiner's Island and he buries the bulk of the treasure, which I think he's being smart. He's hedging his bet. If Bellamont turns out to be double-crossing him, he can say, I'm the only man in the world who knows where the treasure is. He was trying to give himself what I call a get-out-of-jail-free card, another opportunity. If the French passes didn't work, his second bit of leverage would be that this is where the gold and silver is. It's on Gardiner's Island.
In 1699, Kidd and Bellamont meet in Boston for the first time in 3 years. Bellamont asks Kidd to give him an account of his voyage.
And instantly he is brought before the governor and his council and told to give a written receipt for everything he has done and a written narrative of his journey. He's fairly outraged. So Kidd now goes to Bellamont's house to confront him. It just so happens it's at the exact same time that an order has been given for Kidd's arrest. Kidd for once decides to be a gentleman. I mean, here's a guy who's been a fighter on a privateer ship, could fight his way. And he decides to be a gentleman. He submits to arrest in the governor's mansion.
Zax believes that Kidd's very presence in Boston supports his claim that he is a privateer, not a pirate.
If he was a true pirate, he doesn't come back. It's as simple as that. He just disappears. He keeps his money. He goes to the Caribbean. He sends a message to Sarah, come meet me in Ile Vache and we'll live the pirate life. We'll go to Port Royal, we'll go wherever. But he doesn't do that. He comes back to the heart of the English Empire. He comes back to Boston, which is like the lead city in the colonies. What pirate comes to Boston, please?
With no legal record of his voyage, Governor Bellamont double-crosses Kidd and has him arrested. He also sends Kidd's belongings and retrieved treasure back to the Admiralty in London. After only 6 days on shore, Captain Kidd will never be a free man again.
He gets held in Boston for something like 8 months because Governor Bellamont wants to know what to do with Kidd. Maybe Kidd is supposed to disappear in the colonies. Maybe Governor Bellamont is terrified of offending those 4 lords and the king. His entire fortune is dependent on this being handled properly, so he keeps waiting for instructions. And it takes, a month or two to travel each way. So this takes a long time before that happens.
It takes 8 months of being landlocked in his cell before Kidd is returned to London by law in February of 1700. Ashore in England, he is stripped bare of all his belongings.
He takes with him all of the records of his voyage because they're all he's got in order to make the claim that he's going to make, and that is, the ships I captured were French. I have a privateering commission. Besides my instructions to capture pirates, I do have a privateering commission. These ships are French. He takes his passes with him. He takes the records of the ships. He's got everything. Gets to London. All of his papers are seized, of course, because he's now a very notorious individual. He's a big-time pirate. But more importantly, he's very dangerous to the very man who sponsored his voyage because they're out of government. And the opposition is now in power, and the opposition would love to smear their opponents with a charge of piracy.
They have a choice. His backers have a choice. He is now known as a notorious pirate. They can either defend him and say, no, he was not a pirate, or they can say, we gave him an honorable commission and he abused that commission. He turned on us and he turned pirate.
Kidd is put in solitary confinement at Newgate Prison until he is summoned for his first pretrial interview.
He's interviewed by the enemies of his friends. He's interviewed by his friends. But the legal processes are started to try him for murder of Gunner Moore and of piracy. He's also got another very powerful enemy at this stage, and that's the East India Company, because they want to use him as an example also. His only hope is to prove himself as a privateer.
But Kidd thinks he has the key to walking away from prison a free man. The French passes that are stored away for 2 years in the Admiralty files.
When he's preparing for his trial, the French passes are nowhere to be found. They have disappeared. And this is an enormous problem for Kidd, because these are what justify his 2 captures, the Quito Merchant and the Ruparel. And he's shown those documents to so many people aboard the ships. He has, I mean, they've been read before the House of Commons, but they're nowhere to be found for his trial.
They're trying one another for treason at this point. These are the most powerful men in England. This is a tough game, and he's a pawn in this. And they're going to get their way with him. That's why he doesn't get his records.
The trial of Captain Kidd is next. On May 8, 1701, 2 years after his arrest, Captain Kidd is brought to trial. The first half of Kidd's trial is for the murder of gunner William Moore. The prosecution needs 2 eyewitnesses to obtain a conviction.
The witnesses for the Crown are a doctor and a crewman who have been cleaned up and who know exactly what to say, who've clearly been coached on their testimony, and they paint a picture of Captain Kidd intentionally killing Moore. I just love the idea of premeditated murder by bucket. You know, that's of all the weapons to choose, bucket.
After an hour of deliberation, the jury comes back with a verdict: guilty, condemning him to death with no appeal. For the defense, Captain Kidd claims the Quito Merchant he captured was flying the French flag, the legitimate enemy flag. He could prove it if he could only have his records. He has the French identity passes they handed over to him as proof. How could he have known it was a ship friendly to England? This is a setup, he argues. Someone's hiding them or deliberately lost them. But the French passes never materialize. The next day, Kidd is convicted of all the piracy charges and lay under 2 death sentences. In total, Kidd's trial lasts 2 days. He never had a chance.
I think there's no doubt that Captain Kidd's trial was a very unfair trial. First of all, the prosecution got all the evidence against him. They were determined to convict him anyway. He was a scapegoat in a show trial, and he could produce no evidence to support him. He swore blind that he was an innocent man from beginning to end. They had all the evidence to prove that he had murdered his gunner, that he committed piracy in the Indian Ocean, and so it was a cut and dry case.
In terms of modern jurisprudence, the trial's a farce. I mean, he's not allowed a lawyer. He has to defend himself. He's not allowed his records.
History is left believing that the records he claimed would have exonerated him either vanished, were deliberately hidden, or didn't exist at all. In 1911, deep within the corridors of London's Public Records Office, American treasure hunter R.D. Payne was searching for treasure maps from the pirates of 200 years earlier. While digging through 17th century Admiralty files, Payne discovered 2 French passes that had been misfiled. Upon inspection, they were the very passes taken off 2 ships by one of history's most ruthless buccaneers, Captain William Kidd.
Kidd insisted at his trial, I have my records here. If I'm allowed to get my records, I can prove my innocence. but those records are not available.
There they were 200 years late. Kidd was telling the truth. But in a trial that seemed predestined to a guilty verdict, would anyone have believed him? A procession of onlookers followed Captain Kidd along with 3 other men sentenced to die at execution dock. Set in place, the noose is attached around Kidd's neck. The platform knocked away, but the rope breaks.
And Kidd had been drunk. Kidd got roaring drunk on the way to the gallows. And the rope breaks and he watches. He has to lie on the ground looking up in a drunken stupor at 2 Frenchmen dying. And what's amazing back then is they only had the rope about a foot long. So when the platform's knocked out, you didn't have your neck snap. You did what's called the dance of death, or the sheriff's dance. And they didn't tie the legs either, because it was much more amusing for the crowd to watch the guy do this spastic thing, you know, with his legs, and his hands were trussed behind him, and his legs would do the dance of death. And then there was a moment, will they hang Kidd again, or is this an act of God? Does he get spared?
Kidd is not so lucky. Within a few minutes, he is hanged again. His body is taken to Tilbury Point.
And it actually hanged as a sort of landmark, as a warning to sailors, this is the fate of pirates.
And this is what will become of you if you choose such a fate. Is there enough evidence to have convicted Captain Kidd of piracy? It's fair to say that the discovery of Kidd's French passes keeps history wondering whether Kidd deserved such a fate.
On the other hand, he had killed Gunner Moore. On the other hand, he had committed piracy. Both of those are capital crimes. His trial is a farce to us, so he's a very sympathetic character. But he was a pirate, and he was a murderer.
He claimed later, when he was on trial for his life, that if I have broken any laws, it was the fault of the people who hired me. I did what I was hired to do. And in a way, he was, how could he assume that 4 of the most powerful lords, speaker of lords, how could he assume that they were breaking the law?
There's no doubt that what happened to Kidd changed the fundamental law in England relating to piracy and became a very important aspect of how the British would in the end bring piracy to a conclusion in the role of the buccaneer of the 17th century and the 1720s.
In the 21st century, piracy still exists.
There's plenty of piracy now. There's a website where on the Maritime Global Net where you can see where acts of piracy are taking place. They're taking place every day. And believe me, those are not romantic people. They aren't people that you would go make movies about now. They're just thieves, and some of them are murderous thieves, and they do make the overhead, the cost of conducting trade, more expensive. They're no different than the people in the 17th century.
Captain Kidd's legacy lives on to this day in the form of Greenwich Hospital in England, built with the money taken from Kidd's captured goods. That treasure lives in infamy. Every year, treasure hunters continue to search for Captain Kidd's buried fortune, believing he was the most bloodthirsty of them all. Now they have something new to wonder about. Those 2 French passes, do they mean he was not a pirate after all?